Today I have a discussion with Dr. Yoshi, who's an expert on EBOO, which is extracorporeal blood oxygenation, ozonation. That's a huge mouthful, but essentially all it is a high dose form of ozone therapy. You have a line in one arm and a line in the other, and blood is circulating from one arm to the other. And in the middle, you have this filter type thing that the ozone is going into. So we covered that, what that entails, what the benefits are, and how it can really help people, especially with some spike protein stuff that's been happening recently. But I was really more interested in the methylene blue discussion. So we got into that. Dr. Mercola a couple weeks ago mixed some into my drink and said, drink this. And I was like, what the heck is this? So it was a good opportunity for me to learn about methylene blue. It makes us more photosensitive, so we can be more receptive to vitamin D from the sun. And it is like a lubricant for our mitochondria to spin up production and create more energy. So this was a pretty interesting discussion on those two different topics. And if you don't know Dr. Yoshi, he's just a wonderful person in general, very heartfelt, very empathetic, and very much driven to help people with natural methods. Well, thanks so much for joining today, Dr. Yoshi. I'm really looking forward to talking with you because I am kind of selfishly curious about what you've been doing with methylene blue and EBOO and all these like cutting edge, natural, holistic, integrative modalities that are helping people to get better. I've heard some of the interviews that you've done and you're like, man, I've really progressed in the last 8 years. And I think that we're kind of getting to some pretty cutting edge stuff in terms of helping people to heal. So could you explain a little bit though about who you are and what it is that you do?
Yeah, first of all, thank you. I love the work you do and love the way you just spreading the word and how you're curious. That's always so needed and in the industry and so appreciated. So thank you. And oh boy, where to start? Long story. Grew up out in the woods, hippie parents. Family members definitely had some health issues over the year. And so that kind of drove me towards wanting to go into medicine. But as you've probably heard in our industry so many times, mainstream Western medicine, while it certainly has its benefits in certain situations, mainly emergent or surgical situations, it definitely falls short on the chronic diseases that are out there. And so just kind of slowly, because of my family members largely, I've been very curious since I opened up my practice in 2011 after residency, just in what tools we can add to the toolbox to help us towards a more and better and quicker and more efficient healing. And along the way, ozone has been a big part of that in a number of ways. I first kind of fell into ozone learning about prolozone because my dad's really bad, severe knee osteoarthritis. And from there, it just kind of trickled down. And now we're doing EBOO, extracorporeal blood oxygenation and ozonation, among other things. Lots of other things.
It's really cool, man. So you started doing integrative medicine right out of residency. Is that accurate?
Pretty much. I mean, by that third year, I was by my last year of residency, I definitely knew I wanted to. It's like, okay, there's just something more, because it's like through residency, it's like they're training us to spend 7 minutes with the patient, and it's like get in, get out. I have my hand on the doorknob trying to get out as the patient is asking more questions. And I just I very rarely felt like I was truly serving the patient's best interest at heart, right? And so after that, I'm just like, I cannot practice in that model. What else is out there? So yeah, right out of residency, actually I was like last couple months of residency, I took my first kind of integrative medicine conference. And from there, it was just, like not Pandora's box, but going down the rabbit hole, right? In a good way.
Yeah. And I think just seeing that there's so many options out there, then kind of what we're given as this is the indication, this is the tool you use and what you do. But man, there's just so much stuff out there. So I'm sure that was eye-opening. So
there is,
yeah,
and it's hugely like the more I learn, the more I learn that I don't know. And it's that kind of, I just enjoy that curiosity. And I let that curiosity drive me to help my patients more.
Well, it's fun. Like I find like in this industry that it's really fulfilling from multiple angles. You kind of have the patient side and the people that you're helping. That's kind of like the mission. And I know you have a backstory with that too. And I don't know if you know about like how my family got involved, but it was through my brother that had brain cancer. And so that brought us into this world. And then just makes you capable of relating to people and people who are in a situation, and seeing these success stories is just so fulfilling. And then you kind of have the mental stimulus of like, oh, I'm doing something different, and it's a little bit edgy feeling, like I'm trying to figure out what is going to be the best result for the patient regardless of where it comes from. So it's like mentally stimulating. And then you have like the business side of it where you're aligning with people that you like to work with, or doing these interviews or whatever. And it's, man, it's a really cool place to be in for sure.
Amen.
Let's dig in a little bit. I think I want to start with EBU, and then I want to learn primarily about methylene blue personally, but I want you to lead the conversation from there. So can you explain to me, or for people that don't know, what is EBU?
Yeah. So you're Mr. Ozone guy, so I'm sure your audience knows a lot about ozone, and it kind of, there's so many different forms of potential ozone therapy. And I think of EBU as, it's the new kid on the block. I mean, yes, there's been practitioners around the world that have been doing it for a while, but in terms of being in the United States, it really is the new kid on the block. And it's the most advanced form of ozone, probably the most effective. And that's because partially it's kind of an invasive procedure. It's easy, but it's still invasive, just in the sense that you have an IV ideally coming one out of one arm and another IV going back in the other arm, typically, assuming those are where you got two good veins. So IV coming out, blood basically comes out of one arm, goes through a filter, and then goes back into the other arm. But in that filter, there's an oxygen and ozone mixture that's kind of going countercurrent or across the blood and oxygenating and ozonating the blood. And so in that filter, what sets EBU apart from the other forms of ozone out there is that filter. It just gives this huge surface area of blood to be exposed to the oxygen ozone mixture, gas mixture. And so you can end up over, different people will do EBU for different periods of time, maybe 40 minutes, 60 minutes, whatever it is. But given the same amount of time, you can just ultimately get a lot more ozone on board, which, anecdotally, in my experience, is a good thing. We've been doing this for a couple of years now. By my last count, I kind of lost track a couple months ago, but we're probably done about 1,100 of these EBU sessions now. And so we have a lot of experience, and it seems to be a step up from any other form of ozone therapy. And it's the way we've been doing it. It's been really safe, really well tolerated. Out of 1,100 patients, it's not like we haven't had any issues. In the beginning, it was definitely there was a learning curve, because I put together my own machine, and there's just a lot of components to that, and experimentation mostly on myself, and then family members, and then staff members. So it's been a very fun process to learn more. And through that, I've changed the protocol around a little bit, and now SOTMed is coming out with an EBU machine, which we've just started using. So I'm excited to kind of compare and contrast, and hopefully just work together to make a better product, right? Because at the end of the day, if I've been doing something some way, or if someone else, another doctor, practitioner somewhere else, has been doing something a certain way, ultimately, I want to figure out what the best way is forward, right? Just because I've been doing something doesn't mean it's the best. In fact, I almost guarantee that there's a better way. And so I'm very passionate about just continually learning what the best process is.
So I have a couple questions from there. Like, who is it helping primarily? And then why do you think it's better?
Yeah, so I would, there's kind of a couple different categories of people, right? You have your healthy people who are interested in really any form of ozone, including EBU, who are just interested in terms of health maintenance, prevention. Some people might say anti-aging. I would say more maybe the biohackers, right? So they're just doing it to kind of get ahead. But most people who come into my office are chronically ill and very sick, and the needle has not moved enough in the healing direction for them. And so they're interested in something else. And that's mainly mold, Lyme, chronic infections, and then autoimmune. I would say those are probably the biggest categories of people that we're able to help. And, people are everybody's so individual. So sometimes it's like one treatment and, oh my gosh, I feel so much better. Sometimes people will need repeat treatments, and that's just very individualized on the person. But people come back to us because they're being helped. Very rarely has it been, they do 2 or 3 or 4 treatments and have not seen anything. In fact, I really can't think of one person. Now we've done a lot, but I try to keep track as best as I can of, any individual who it might not help. And almost categorically, people are finding it beneficial. And again, I think the main reason it's such an amazing therapy is because we're getting that huge surface, that huge amount of blood volume exposed to the ozone. In a way that's more so than with 10 pass, more so with, a single pass or MAH, more so with rectal ozone. And all of those are beautiful. Like, I recommend all of those treatments because there's, EBU does tend to be it's a very intense process, very hands-on. So it's a more expensive treatment. So it's not truly accessible to everyone. So there's a lot of different ozone modalities, assuming we're going with ozone, right? There's always let's not jump straight to EBU, right? We want to make sure that we're covering our basis from the simple lifestyle stuff to, in the integrative world, there's so many options, right?
So what do you think EBU is doing differently than you might get from like a major autohemotherapy? And just to explain really quickly what those are, EBU is like the extra dose of ozone therapy. We have the machine running and the blood going in one arm, out the other. Major autohemotherapy is just kind of a lower dose standard form of ozone therapy. But what would you say the primary difference between the two is?
So with an MAH, there's slightly altering dosages of ozone and dosages of blood that you'll use. But again, that's that single pass. Typically, you're drawing out maybe 50 cc's of blood, sometimes more, putting it in a bag and then injecting ozone into that bag and then letting it drain back into you, right? And with that, I've calculated this before, but I feel like you're getting around maybe 10 milligrams, 12 milligrams typically of ozone versus an EBU. Now, again, there's different protocols run out there, but with EBU, you're getting somewhere probably around 140 milligrams to maybe even upwards of 240 milligrams of ozone. So you can see just in terms of pure quantity of ozone, you're doing 10, 15, maybe even 20 times the amount of ozone. And the other thing I like about the EBU is, and again, I'll kind of keep going back to this, different people do different protocols on it, but I like to adjust the gamma of the ozone. So that's kind of, you can think of it as the intensity of the ozone, right? That's hitting the blood. Because I think, meaning, from the literature that I've looked at, from what I've heard other practitioners say, from what I've experienced myself, I feel like a different kind of patient might benefit more from a different gamma of ozone given during the course of the treatment. So whereas MAH, you're going to kind of, typically it's 50 gamma. You just put it in the bag and you're done, right? Well, my question to myself, and I think I kind of know a little bit of the answer. I don't know all of the biochemical mechanisms, but 50 gamma is going to do a certain thing to the average red blood cell, and then physiologically once that blood gets back into the body, compared to 3 gamma or 10 gamma or 30 gamma, right? And so my understanding, and again, I'm totally open, would love to hear people's feedback if someone has other opinions on this, but my understanding currently is if you're kind of in below 20 gamma of ozone approximately, you're looking at much more of maybe a mitochondrial benefit, versus if you're in the 20 to 30, perhaps it's more, there might be a little bit more of that whole NRF2 regulation. So you're looking at more stimulating your antioxidant, your innate natural antioxidant system, versus if you're getting up into perhaps the 30 to 40 gamma. And again, I mean, I'm going by tens, right? So this is approximate. But then you're going to be looking at perhaps helping an autoimmune situation more, versus once you get above 40, 50 gamma, I feel like that might be more for acute infections. Now, there's probably overlap to all of those levels, but just as an easy way of thinking about it, that's how I think about it. And so during EBU, it's very easy to kind of, turn the knobs and get those different scenarios. So I'm looking at how to individualize the EBU treatment more to a patient.
Yeah, I think
does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And it's kind of, I think, a needed area, because with Ozone, there's not a lot of, I feel like we're getting a little bit deep into it, but that's okay. With Ozone, there's not a lot of, they kind of give dosing windows, and they have some speculation on like what to dose when, but not a whole lot. Like the International Scientific Committee and some of those boards just kind of are more like, here's like a window and it does the same thing, essentially. And so I don't know, I've been learning a lot about it too, in terms of like, or at least trying to learn more about how it's working within the body. And it would be really interesting. Are you doing any, I know you said you're doing a study, I don't know what that entails, but does that have to do with the dosing and seeing how the body responds differently based on the dosing?
Not initially. We're just going to stick with a certain dosing, a low gamma. Start out with 10 patients, literally be opening that up probably here at the end of October, beginning of November. Mainly looking at inflammation, so CRP markers, though platelet count as well. Just a few basic blood markers. So initially, just one dose, but ideally, carried forward over the coming months and years, we would be testing that out on different doses. And I believe that will happen. Okay. So I'm excited to kind of go into that direction.
So what is the purpose of the study that you guys are trying to do right now? What are you trying to figure out?
I mean, really, at the end of the day, I can sit there. There's so much placebo effect, right? And I'm a huge fan of placebo. Like if something works, let's go with it, right? But and I think EBU, there's a potential for a huge placebo effect, right? Because anytime you're getting 2 IVs, your blood's going out of the body through this filter, you can see it. Like some people will get vasovagal with looking at their own blood. So it's just like it can be this huge mental gain for a lot of people, and that placebo could be affecting them greatly. So now I'm not saying it would be only placebo, right? Because of what I've seen over 1,100 treatments, I do believe that this is a very good treatment, and we've been doing other ozone therapies for many years now, over a decade, right? So I'm a very strong believer in ozone, but at the same time, I'd love some objective data. What does it do to the CRP levels, which is an inflammation, kind of a general inflammation marker? What does it do anything to the platelets? What does it do to the lymphocytes, the neutrophils, right? Does it change those ratios? What else were you testing for? I don't think it's going to do a lot to liver and kidney function. That's not really the main point of this. But again, just to have some data of, hey, how does the blood change after one treatment? How does it change after 2 treatments, after 3 treatments? That's initially what the study is going to do. We're going to take blood before and after 3 sessions, including a week after that 3rd session. So we should be able to see, we should be able to see if it's moving those markers, right? There's so many potential things we could test for. So we're starting small and we'll kind of go out from there. I'm really curious. Okay, maybe we see something initially right after a treatment, meaning immediately after a treatment. But then what about after like a week, right? So they're going to come into the office once a week for 3 weeks. And then on that 4th week, So, I mean, I'm really curious, will we see something? Will we see something good? Will we not see something at all? I don't know. And no matter what we find, it'll be able to inform our decision of where to go. But I just, the more objective data we have, the better. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, and there is a lot surrounding ozone, but you're talking specifically like EBU and the methodology that you guys are kind of using to be able to break. Yeah, I would agree with the placebo aspect as being a huge potential with EBU. It's so experiential, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that invites some of that. And I would agree with you. You want to create your environment, whether that's even just your clinic, in a way that portrays healing, right? Because that mind is so strong that it can induce that. I mean, people spontaneously heal from stuff all the time, and your mind and your body is a part of that. So that's totally understandable. I want to move a little bit into methylene blue because I'm very curious about that. So can you just give me an idea of what this thing is? I was at a conference the other week, and Dr. Mercola came over with a blue powder and mixed it into my drink. And normally I wouldn't let people do that, but he said it's good for you. And I was like, okay, now I want to learn about this.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. He was in our office probably right before that. And talking about his blue powder. And this is like, I just got to be totally honest. This is a new field. It's kind of taking the integrative medicine by storm. It's definitely one of the new kind of up and coming therapies. A lot of biohackers are using it now. I think there's still a lot to be learned about it also, kind of like EBU, frankly. So with that caveat though, I mean, methylene blue has been around for over 100 years. It's a very safe salt product. I like to say our bodies are not deficient in methylene blue. And at the same time, I'm always considering what are the potential pros versus what are the potential cons of any therapy, right? And methylene blue, I mean, you have to take like stupid high doses for it to have any negative effect on you. Now people will Google methylene blue side effects and read about what other medications not to be on. If you're on an antidepressant, don't take it. Like so much on the internet, it's overreactive, as well, I'll say. Those studies were really done, people in open surgery on parathyroids where they were literally dumping like grams and grams of methylene blue on who had side effects. So, just back up. If someone's using any semblance of a unharmful dose, there's really only potential benefit. Now, a caveat, I mean, I don't want to paint anything as a silver bullet ever. We had one person who actually became anaphylactic with IV methylene blue. But that's anybody can be allergic to almost anything, right? Now, again, that's out of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of patients, much less. I mean, I haven't even heard of any. I've asked other practitioners who are using it and recommending it to patients, and nobody else has experienced that. So I think that that's probably extremely unlikely. This individual was also very allergic already. So, maybe we just pushed him over the edge, right? But just want to throw that out there because something's taken a certain industry by storm, I like people to think about it and not just hop on a bandwagon just to hop on a bandwagon. So having said that, methylene blue basically goes straight into the mitochondria. That's where it was first discovered. It was as a stain. Well, it turns out it stains the mitochondria in cells. And so why that's so useful in the human body is because any tissue, like the more mitochondrial dense a tissue is in the body, the more beneficial effect methylene blue can have on it. And so brain cells, heart cells, like just as an example, tend to be like some of the most mitochondrial dense tissues in the bodies, in the body. And so the methylene blue, whether you take it orally, rectally, intravenously, it's going to go pretty much within just minutes straight to those areas in particular. It's used kind of on that front. It's used a lot for mental cognition. just to enhance that. If someone's having a hard time, it usually means that mitochondria in that particular area of the brain, or it could mean, I should say, that mitochondria in that particular part of the brain are maybe just not functioning optimally, right? So maybe you don't have a bunch of cell death, but maybe it's kind of like a car, right? Maybe it's kind of sputtering a little bit, so it can still get you places, but just not optimally. And so methylene blue is just fantastic for any mitochondrial issue, disease, condition. And the reality is most chronic medical conditions cause, there's going to be a certain amount of mitochondrial enhancement that could be had. When the body mitochondria make the body's energy. And when the body has enough energy, the body can then usually kind of self-correct. It can heal itself. And so often we just don't have, maybe because of toxins in our body or an infection or whatever, we're just running low on energy, not just outward energy that we feel day to day, but our mitochondria just aren't functioning properly enough to be able to give us enough energy to then do our own healing. So that's a little just initial intro. Do you have more specific questions on that?
Well, I mean, a lot, but I guess off that. So is it actually generating more mitochondria, or are we just making the mitochondria perform better? Or
yes to the second,
a higher energy output?
Yeah, yes to the second part. So it does not, to my knowledge, does not help produce more mitochondria. It's simply making those mitochondria more efficient. There's a whole electron transport chain in the cell. For practitioners, doctors out there who are listening, you'll know what that is. But ultimately, it's basically increasing the amount of ATP and NAD that are being produced.
Okay.
Which are ATP and NAD are basically the two main currencies of energy in our body.
Yeah. No, it's perfect, because it's like you want things that create an endogenous reaction, meaning our body starts to naturally create it. Just like with ozone, you get an upregulation in antioxidant enzymes, and that, supplement antioxidants. But I think that's a great place to be, because if your body can be stimulated to naturally create them, that's a really good scenario. So what kind of effects does it have noticeable effects for people typically, or is it more of a mild type deal?
It does not, so it does not amp you up. It's not like, I don't know, it's not like nicotine or caffeine necessarily. It does not amp you up. But typically, so I'll use it from time to time. I don't use it all the time, but it's one of those things where it's like, say I get a bad night's sleep for whatever reason, right? I have 3 little kids. And so I might take some methylene blue the next day. And it's something where it's like, when I look back at the end of the day, it's like, oh, I didn't get as tired as I would have suspected I would have gotten, right? It's like, oh, I actually did have more energy. So it's a nice, really calm type of energy that you'll feel. And that's what most people report. Now, methylene blue absorbs red light. It actually absorbs the full visible light spectrum. But when you get into the red light specifically, it's from 660 to 670 nanometers. That, in combination with the methylene blue, is phenomenal. It kind of supercharges the effects of the methylene blue. And that's because when the methylene blue goes into the mitochondria, and then you get these little photon packets of light shining through the skin and getting into the mitochondria, it excites the methylene blue and actually makes that ATP, NAD production even quicker, faster, more. And so what we do is we actually, in my office, have a red light cap. We have some red and infrared light blankets that we can put on people. And so if there's like an area, for a lot of people, it's the brain that we're trying to help. So we'll put on the little red light cap while they're doing methylene blue. If they have a bladder infection, the methylene blue will turn the urine greenish or bluish as well. But we might put the red light blanket over their pelvis to kind of stimulate that methylene blue and make it even more effective. Yeah, so that's definitely something to know about methylene blue. If you're going to do it, I always recommend trying to do it with some red light therapy. Now, the reality is good old-fashioned sunlight has red light in it. So I think it's wonderful if people use methylene blue to just go out and get some sunlight, right? Never get a sunburn, but get tons of good sunlight without the sunburn. I think people, especially in the biohacking industry, just get so hooked on, buying the next machine, right? It's like, okay, let's just actually go back outside in nature. It's free, assuming it's not winter time and you're not super north. But I was going to go somewhere else with that.
That's okay. So to drastically oversimplify it, and I mean drastically, methylene blue is like the lubricant for the mitochondria to run a little bit faster. So it's like the oil for the engine. And then the red light is like stepping on the gas pedal to make it rev up a little bit faster. So is it an antioxidant too, or no?
It's kind of like ascorbic acid, actually. So a lot of people call IV vitamin C. It's not IV vitamin C, it's IV ascorbic acid. And there's something about, in lower doses, it's more of an antioxidant, and then in higher doses, it's a pro-oxidant. Methylene blue, from my understanding, it carries that similar, it basically behaves similarly. So in lower doses, it is actually an antioxidant. In higher doses, it is more of a pro-oxidant. I'm a little bit fuzzy on where that, where that threshold is. Like, I've heard for ascorbic acid somewhere around 10 grams or 15 or 20 grams. It really goes into that when it's given all together or over a very short time window, that it turns into a pro-oxidant. With methylene blue, I read somewhere, and I cannot cite it. I'm sorry, I can't. But I read somewhere that it's probably around 50 milligrams. I would love people to kind of fact check me on that. So do your own research. But my understanding in terms of what is a safe dose of methylene blue is if you're under 100 milligrams a day, and I don't ever recommend doing anything 7 days a week. I always like to take a little break anyways, but assuming you were using methylene blue 5 days a week, say, I feel like if you're keeping it under 100 milligrams, you're probably okay. Now, I'm also a fan of lowest effective dose. So do I think everybody needs 100 milligrams? Absolutely not. I wish I could just give a dose that was like optimal for everybody. I suspect something like 4 milligrams, 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams is probably very, very well tolerated and is probably enough and all that anybody really needs. One thing I would like to mention, I mentioned intravenously, we do that sometimes on the same day as an EBU session even. Although
does it turn the blood blue?
It does.
That's so cool.
It does, actually. Yeah, it's totally Smurf blood, and there's so many Smurf jokes going around with it. If you use a suppository, just make sure you're using a glove. Otherwise, it's going to be very obvious that you used a suppository. Okay. Which I love the suppository method because it's kind of a time-released way of using it. The half-life of methylene blue is somewhere around half a day, around 12 hours. And then if you're going to do it orally, for a long time, I was recommending people kind of do it sublingually or use a little troche method. But if you're doing it orally, I actually recommend swallowing it. It actually is very easily absorbed in the stomach and intestines almost instantaneously. Without and still having it be effective. I have personally had a couple of people who I recommended they use it sublingually, and it destroyed their oral mucosa, and their dentist noticed that. And I think that, kind of going back to the pro-oxidant question, I think that it was too much of a pro-oxidant for their oral mucosa because they were doing it almost every day. As soon as they stopped, their oral mucosa, healed. So I'm going to I want people, I'm not saying don't ever do it, right? I just think that these individuals were doing it too much.
Okay.
Right. And I don't know if that was dose dependent, right? Maybe I think they were taking probably around 8 milligrams to 16 milligrams. So maybe at 1 milligram or 2 milligrams, you lose that antioxidant effect to the oral mucosa. But just want to throw that out again, get people thinking, right? I'm a big fan of using that experience and thinking it. And again, not just hopping on a bandwagon and just going for it just because everybody else is doing it.
But that's fun.
I know it is fun. I'm not saying I haven't done that before, right? That's how I made these mistakes, right?
I mean, yeah, it's the fundamental principles that always bring us home, but it's like, yeah, sometimes it's fun to just try out something new and do something new. And there is genuinely, it seems like a lot of people that could use it, but so I don't know if this is a question you actually want to answer, but I've heard the same thing about like IVC, ascorbic acid, that it turns into an oxidant from an antioxidant status. So do you know, like, how does that make that transformation? It's not something I understand at all. So I was curious if you had any thoughts on that.
I would love to be able to point, talk about the exact biochemical mechanism that happens to. I can't. I think there's something so I think most people will know that if you take too much vitamin C orally, you kind of get the runs, right? Mm-hmm. Loosens up your stool, maybe get diarrhea. And so there's something about vitamin C taken orally. I don't think it's possible to get into that pro-oxidant effect, right? So vitamin C really should be thought of as an antioxidant, an exogenous antioxidant that we take orally through food, ideally. Now, when we're talking about IV vitamin C, which is not really vitamin C because it's IV ascorbic acid, which is just one part, given maybe it's the main part of vitamin C, but it's still just one part. When you're putting in more than, again, 10 grams, now keep in mind a typical oral dose is maybe 500 milligrams, maybe 1,000 milligrams, which is, 1 gram, 1,000 milligrams, 1 gram. So that's a typical oral dose. And you might take that if you're going through an acute infection. You might do that every hour, every 2 hours, every 3 hours. So you can kind of only get in, call it 10 grams over the course of 24 hours. Now, when people come into various offices that do IV ascorbic acid, you're typically doing, if you do it in the Myers, maybe it's a lower dose. But typically, if you're coming in for IV ascorbic acid, you're going to be doing it in 10 grams or more, typically probably more like 25 grams. That seems to be a very common dosing that people will do in a lot of immune drips. That's what we do in my office, right? When you're doing it in that high of a dose, it's doing so much more than the body could ever take in orally. So I'm just going to go with its pure quantity. And it's ascorbic acid, right? It's an acid. And that's got to have something to do with the pro-oxidant effect. There's a lot of literature that people can go into, and that's why it perhaps helps with cancer. Not allowed to say treats cancer, but maybe used as an adjunctive therapy in cancer is because of that, probably partially because of that pro-oxidant effect. So again, I can't speak to the exact biochemical mechanism of exactly when and why it turns into a pro-oxidant, but I'm just kind of thinking aloud. And that's got to be kind of something there's got to be something there.
Well, it's just super interesting that you can kind of have like a base, like say an antioxidant, and then at some point your body decides this is an oxidant now. So yeah. It's just cool, right? Like there's just so much stuff our body is able to do. And
it's kind of the dose is in the poison. Right? Yeah. Or the poison is in the dose, right? The poison is in the dose. The medicine is in the dose. And that can be said of anything, right? Not that something turns from an antioxidant to a pro-oxidant, but it's like the dosing has everything to do with it, right? If you drink 10 gallons of water right now, you're going to have seizures and probably will die, right? And so it's like water is not good or bad. It's just, it's how we use something. And so that's why more is not always better. And that goes for ozone, it goes for methylene blue, it goes for anything.
I've been learning that principle. I'm approaching 30, and now that, injuries start to pile up a little bit around that time. And then it used to be, I can just push through this. I'll heal and I'll still get stronger. And it's like, no, you won't. You won't heal anymore. So,
right.
But yeah, I'm a huge fan of everything in moderation, and just not pushing your limits. I think starting low, going slow, like those are words of wisdom, not like not just some cliche as for safety concerns. It's like, no, your body actually responds good if you treat it gently in those respects and allow yourself to grow on top of what you build. So, and you're using methylene blue in combination with EBU, right?
Yeah. So what we're doing, oftentimes, if it seems appropriate, if someone wants to do it, we will basically ozone, so that ozonate the blood first, and then add in the methylene blue right before it goes back into the body, and then add on the red light, whether it's cap or via the blanket over whatever area we are really wanting to emphasize the healing.
Should we cover red light a little bit too? Is that something you like to talk about?
I mean, red light, I'm happy to, but it goes back to like sunlight is so flippin' healing, and there's a reason it's so flippin' healing, right? And red light is just like one little narrow spectrum of sunlight. And yet there is a lot of literature. I think, who's it? I want to say Mark Sloan. He actually wrote a book on methylene blue and then also on red light and infrared light therapy. That's a really good resource. Ari Whitten also did a really nice job of putting together a great book on red light. So anybody who wants to, I mean, especially Ari Whitten's red light book, I forget the title of it, but I'm sure you can just Google that. You would be hit with tons and tons of resources on it. Most of the red light are just studied at, the visible light spectrum. It's a full spectrum, right? And so we tend to study nice even numbers like 640, 670, 810, which is kind of getting out of the red light or visible light spectrum. So we have these nice like numbers that we specifically study, but ultimately those rays are they're going into the mitochondria, stimulating the mitochondria, the cytochrome, right? Cytocell chrome light. They literally absorb different wavelengths of light, and that's what makes them work. And so part of, I think, a huge contributor to so much chronic disease or just unhealth, we'll call it, is people sitting in rooms with poor lighting, not exposing their mitochondria to natural sunlight or good light. So getting a nice red light panel is absolutely a biohack that can be used. And yet, I think when you're doing something like methylene blue, you can totally biohack and amp up that therapy by shining some red light on it. Super healing. So that's a little bit about it.
Yeah. And I think, crafting your environment to situate, because sunlight is the best. And it's just obvious. We're synergistic with nature. And so it makes sense just even from that standpoint. But I think I struggle with, because like I haven't even seen the sun today or been outside or know what the weather is like outside. And that's like, I shouldn't say a typical day, but that's really common. Like at least three times a week that happens, where I come in when it's dark. Sometimes I'm even leaving when it's dark, and I literally have not seen outside. And so I think it fits into that place. But I think also like crafting, I need to do a better job at crafting my environment that encourages me, that makes it so easy to do that it's not really a chore to be like, oh, I have to make sure to go outside and get 15 minutes of sunlight. And so I think we can, do you guide people on that, on like how to structure their home environment and, to be able to accomplish some of the things that would be good for them?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, I can just tell you now, we just moved into this house. We're renting it out. They have these, I'm looking up right now at it, this awful light source.
Yeah.
It's just like, but I also like this. I'm sitting right in front of windows. I try to open them, so I'm getting some, not direct sunlight, but definitely some natural light. Eyes. I've spoken a lot about mitochondria and sunlight going through the skin, but the reality is also our eyes obviously see light, right? And those are super important areas of the body to get natural light, because of just how much it affects our circadian rhythm, if nothing else. And so it's not like everybody has to go out and get direct sunlight for 15 minutes every day. It's more about being around natural light. Like that should be the first emphasis. And so I do tell people, like, if you're in an office all day, then make sure that you're, walking to the car, looking up into the sky, getting some real, just natural light on your face, in your eyes, right? Don't drive with sunglasses on all the time. So many of us we get up, and I'm guilty of doing this on some days myself, right? We get up, we put on our shoes, so we're not connected to the earth. We're not grounding or kind of resetting the electrical aspects of our body. We put on our nice rubber shoes. We walk straight. We flip. Well, first we flip on the fluorescent lights. We put on our shoes. We go straight to the car. Put on our sunglasses. Drive to the office. Go into our dark office. Turn on the crappy light source. Sit there for 8, 10, 12 hours, and then go back home when it's dark out, right? It's like we humans in the United States, at least, just do not quite often get enough natural light. So, kind of preaching to what you already said, but super, super important. And you can change out light bulbs too, to give off that more natural light. I do. Like I have one option. I have it in a little Excel sheet. Blanking off the top of my head.
I'll throw it in the notes.
There's True Light, True Light, True Dark,
Dave
True Light.
Asprey's.
Yeah, his website. He has they've kind of changed over the past couple of years on what they're offering, but I know he has some really high quality lighting products, right? As much as I'm bashing red light panels, this is a red light panel sitting right next to me, right? And so I can flip that on. I work with a red light helmet. If I'm not with, oops, am I crashing?
You're good.
But so it's like, how do we biohack? How do we use our environment wisely? And also staying connected to nature and natural sources that are free and healthy for us. It's a combination, right? It's a tricky world we live in nowadays. So it does take some consciousness to think through it.
It is. And I think if you can craft your environment to accomplish what you're accomplishing, but in a healthier way, that's like the best way to do it. Because then you don't have to add things into an already busy schedule, we all have. But yeah, I was curious about red light because I just started using it. My friend Scott Chevery sent me a panel and he has Mito red light, and I've liked it. I just don't know enough about it. I know some of the skin benefits, but yeah, comparing it to the sun, I think the sun is going to win because we're made
every day
outside. Yeah,
absolutely.
We flip-flopped it 180. We're supposed to be outside most of the time, and the minority of time, having cover away from light. But yeah, it's been totally flip-flop, and I find it super fascinating too. Just like that. We're so responsive to light, because that was kind of a hard concept I think it is for a lot of people. It's just really outside of kind of what we consider as therapeutic is like light. Yeah, I know the sun's good for me, but does it really have these like massive implications? Well, probably yes.
Absolutely. I'll go out on a limb and say absolutely. I think light is I think sunlight, the full spectrum of all the rays. I think it's so underappreciated. And there's some people out there who are starting to talk about it. But I think we're walking antennas, and I think the quality of our water and the way that it can get structured using electrical forces and packets of photons hitting it. I just there's so much more there that we do not understand yet. And light is, I mean, I think of it as a form of food now, and I didn't even think of it quite in that way even 2-3 years ago. But now I truly like light is a form of food. And a lot of us, just like we have the standard American diet, we have the standard American lighting problem.
Well, we definitely have to be willing to accept the fact that we know very little, even just collectively as a society. And it's like medicine, like we kind of like to think, hey, we kind of got it figured out. We'll cure cancer around the corner at some point, like all this stuff. It's like, no, we're like barely scratching the surface on this
like
thing.
Right there.
Well, and even for me, I'm going through that journey and just recognizing where I don't understand a lot of stuff. And I have my thoughts on like ozone therapy and how it works, but there's just so much more to it. And then something recently that I've been trying to understand better is the idea of like frequencies, these things that are intangible that we can't see. Pulsed electromagnetic frequency I can relate to a little bit because at least I'm experiencing it, right? And I was just always like, I don't know what to do with that because like this guy has this thing and it doesn't really do anything, but there's some sort of frequency coming off it, he says. But there was this Ian Mitchell did a really good YouTube video kind of explaining it. And in one of the things they did, they had this like basically little box that emitted this frequency, and they had somebody that would go into anaphylactic shock if they ate like crab meat or, some sort of severe allergic reaction to shellfish. And so they just put it on his arm on one side, huge histamine reaction, put the same can under the thing for a little while, put it on the other arm, and there's nothing. It's like, what the heck is going on? Like, I don't even know what that is. It looks like a little box, but apparently it's, got something in it. So it's
it's so cool, right? And I can't speak to the frequency thing. I wish I could. I wish I knew more. That's why I love this. That's why I love health, because it's like there's so many amazing and beautiful rabbit holes that we can go down, and that's why it's important to work together and learn from each other. Because if we don't all have to reinvent the wheel, right, we can kind of collectively help more and more people.
Yeah, absolutely. And on the subject of frequencies, and then we'll kind of cap it out because I know you probably got to run, but he also explained to and made the point that like, well, we got the molecules, we got the atoms, but what are the protons made of? How do those work? And that's what we're trying to get into, right? With some of this stuff and like getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And there's just so many layers to it. So for you, Dr. Yoshi, I've appreciated your time. What are the big takeaways that you want to leave people with?
Oh, big takeaways. Honestly, nothing that we've talked about. Get in community with people.
Okay.
That's like, again, I kind of briefly threw out, so like, I'm sorry, don't go straight to Ibu. It's just like, there's so many more basic things to do. And we're just so disconnected nowadays as a whole. We're so disconnected. And so I think just powwowing with people, with each other is so incredible. And there's probably a lot of frequency that happens there. Probably some pheromones as well. And, just lots of love there. And I think those have got to be the building blocks, the basic building blocks of any healing journey, if they're not already part of your daily situation. And so that's point number one, muy grande. In terms of ozone is amazing therapy as adjunct to other modalities. I do believe that Ibu is kind of proving itself as kind of the granddaddy version of ozone therapy. If you're going to someone it's who knows what they're doing and who's putting some thought into it, it's extremely safe. Again, always trying to think about, what are the potential pros of a therapy? What are the potential cons of a therapy? It's a very safe beneficial therapy to do. And so I would leave you with that. If anybody's interested, our website is oasisfamilymedicine.com. I'll just shamelessly self-plug right there.
Yeah.
But oasisfamilymedicine.com. We've done a few other interviews too. People can get to those interviews from that website. And
Yeah, that's wonderful. I love that you grounded it with like the fundamentals and the practical, because I basically have to pop on. I don't have to. I think I want to move into a space that's a little bit more just like some philosophy, but just good like life lessons that don't include Ibu and all that stuff, because I think that's more valuable, really. But I think I've kind of created somewhat of a podcast where I talk about like newer stuff or interesting points to be made, but yeah, I would love to hop on a discussion with you more on the fundamentals of life and how those correlate to health. And I think that would be a fun conversation, quite honestly. So if you're game,
yeah, totally.
I think that would be awesome.
Absolutely. I mean, I just talk about it so much with everybody. Everybody wants to go to the sexy new thing, right? And there's a place for it. Ibu is an amazing, sexy new therapy out there. And for those people who have not, again, have their health needle move enough, who are dedicated and who are doing the other things already, absolutely check it out. Consider it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, thanks, man. I appreciate your time. It's been wonderful talking with you. I'm so glad I got to meet you, and maybe we'll catch you on another one.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. And thank you for all you do.